Hello. Thanks everyone for attending the AWS Summit. Ryan and I, in this session, will discuss how AWS can help you with migrating and modernizing your database applications. Both Ryan and I are database specialist solutions architects here at AWS, and therefore today we're going to be looking at things primarily through the database lens. I'd like to start with a quote from Swami, our vice president across all of our database, analytics, and artificial intelligence and machine learning services. Swami says, "A strong vision with the right preparation and training sets you up for success." Our goal today is to set you up for success in your database application migration journey. We want to make sure you have a good vision for the journey, that you're prepared well, and that you can access the people, programs, and tools you need to succeed. Here's today's agenda. We'll talk about why customers are looking to migrate their database applications. We'll talk about what the typical customer migration journey looks like. And then we'll talk about how AWS can help in terms of people, programs, and tools. Finally, we'll close with some suggested next steps to help you in your database application migration journey. Let's start with some of the key drivers for migrations. It could be driven by infrastructure, such as the challenges with your current hardware in your on-premises data center. That hardware could be near the end of its operational life, or it could have a lack of redundancy. You could be looking for a more highly available solution, like one you can get out of the box with our multi-availability zone deployments. Cost could be another big driver. You might be dealing with high fixed cost based on the need to provision hardware for peak capacity. Instead of that, you're hoping to adopt more of a pay-as-you-go approach. Turn things on, turn things off, and only pay for what you use. Or you might be looking to break away from costs tied up in licensing and annual support of commercial legacy databases. Or scalability could be your driver. It could be hard to scale your infrastructure up and down, whether it's due to finite hardware, cumbersome processes, or again, perhaps due to legacy commercial database licensing constraints. And last, but certainly not least, your business and your customers might be looking for innovation, and you're looking to the cloud to adopt new technologies like serverless and artificial intelligence to speed innovation and provide agility for your developers and customers as your business evolves. You're not alone in thinking about migrating your database applications to AWS. Over 625,000 databases have been migrated to AWS, and that's only counting databases that were migrated using a specific service of ours known as the Database Migration Service, or DMS. We'll talk more about DMS in just a little bit. Customers migrating their databases to AWS include customers from all types of industries, both commercial and public sector. Let's take Samsung as an example. Samsung recently migrated and modernized their application by bringing it to AWS. Their legacy application was monolithic and was proving costly and unable to accommodate growing traffic. They migrated and modernized their application to a more flexible, microservices-driven solution, leveraging the Amazon Aurora relational database. Samsung moved over 1.1 billion Samsung account users from their Oracle database-based platform to their new Amazon Aurora-based platform. And they reduced their database costs by 44% and increased their scalability. Another example is Experian. Like Samsung, Experian was looking to migrate and modernize their database applications in order to deliver the functionality they needed to grow. In the case of Experian, they migrated some workloads to our Amazon DynamoDB key value database and other workloads to our Amazon Aurora cloud native relational database. The end result for Experian is that they were able to boost performance, increase scalability, and ultimately provide more features to their end users. So, let's now talk about the typical customer migration and modernization journey. Conceptually, we look at the journey in 3 phases. First is the assess phase. In this phase, you identify what you have and you think about what it could become. And this helps you create the case for change across your organization. Then there's the mobilize phase, where you use experiences like proof of concepts and pilots, and you set up critical foundational cloud layers, like landing zones and centers of excellence, to help you learn and prepare for the cloud and start to build and run in the cloud. And then finally, there's the migrate and modernize phase, where we move at scale. You take multiple applications and their corresponding databases, and you migrate them, modernize them where it makes sense, optimize them, and repeat. We should highlight that in this 3rd phase, migrate and modernize, the customers who execute this phase well will realize significant top line and bottom line business benefits. So, how can AWS help across your migration journey? We provide help through people, programs, and tools. We're going to look at some of these offerings that you see behind me in more detail. Let's start with tools. These are self-service tools, which means that they're available for you to start using today. We're going to begin with a relatively new tool in preview that we call the DMS Fleet Advisor. This is geared towards customers running large fleets of databases and who need a full picture of everything they have. Fleet Advisor is a discovery tool that has functionality to discover and collect an inventory of running databases, such as your Oracle and SQL Server and MySQL and Postgres databases and others. From there, you can take that collected data and organize it by different dimensions, such as database engine, database edition, version, attributes about the server, such as operating system or the hardware that makes up the server, and attributes about the database itself, like number of tables, number of schemas, lines of code. You can use that information to feed it into analysis and business case development to help you make directional decisions across your entire database estate. So in short, the DMS Fleet Advisor is a tool that can help in the assess phase, as it helps you build a better picture of what you currently have. The next tool that we're going to talk about is really a key tool, a key part of our database application migration capabilities. It's what we call our Schema Conversion tool, or SCT. SCT allows us to connect to your existing commercial databases, such as your Oracle and SQL Server, and Netezza and Teradata, DB2, Sybase, and others. And once it's connected, look inside the database at the schemas and the structures in it. And it can assess the ability to migrate and convert from that database engine potentially to other more open cloud-native databases. Once we've gone through the assessment phase, we can then continue to use the Schema Conversion tool for the mobilize and the migrate and modernize phase. This is where the tool will help automatically convert database schema objects like table definitions and indexes and views and in-database code like stored procedures and triggers from one database engine to a new target database engine. And where the tool is unable to automatically convert a specific database object, it'll raise warnings and issues so that you can focus on that area and let the Schema Conversion tool handle the simpler conversion cases. The Schema Conversion tool can also look inside your application source code for embedded SQL and help refactor that SQL code from one database engine dialect to another. We'll talk more about application code conversion later on in the presentation. Before we do that, we'd like to go a little bit deeper in the Schema Conversion tool and how it helps us in the assess phase. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan for more.
Thanks, David. And when we think of the assess phase, it's useful to think of this mental model called the 6 Rs. There are things we can do with this application as we think about moving it to the cloud. We could perhaps retain it. We don't move it. We leave it where it runs today, and there could be situations where that makes sense. We could retire the application. Perhaps we no longer need the functionality, or we're getting it from somewhere else. Or we could repurchase the application. Potentially, we purchase it from a SaaS provider, so we don't have to maintain and operate the application ourselves. But the next 3 is where David and I typically talk to customers about application and database migrations. Now, we can rehost this database. So we're deciding to keep our application. We have to decide what we want to do with the database. We can rehost it, aka lift and shift. We can re-platform it, also called move to manage, or we can refactor this database and spend some time doing some conversion and re-architecture. Now let's look at a specific example. Now in this example, rehosting would be moving that database, or I'm sorry. In this example, we're talking about an application that works with an Oracle backend. And our options are to rehost that Oracle database. So we're going to move that database to EC2, which is our compute platform. And this would be considered self-managed or customer-managed. So customers are responsible for doing things like patching and backups, setting up high availability. So they're really not getting the full benefits of the cloud. So in many cases, customers, even though they're staying with that Oracle database, will re-platform that database. They will move it to our managed service called RDS. And this is where AWS takes care of that undifferentiated heavy lifting, things like patching, backups, and setting up high availability so that customers can focus on their business needs. And then looking forward, many customers may choose to refactor that database. They're going to take the opportunity to break free from legacy commercial database platforms. So an example of this could be moving from Oracle to something like RDS Postgres or Aurora with Postgres compatibility. Let's talk a little bit more about SCT and how it helps us during this assess phase. The Schema Conversion tool provides what we call assessment reports. You simply connect to your source database, you tell us the schema or schemas that you want inspected, and then SCT will connect to your database, do the inspection, and prepare this comprehensive report. And what you're seeing here is an example of the executive summary of such a report. In this case, you can see that we're connected to an Oracle 19c database, and SCT has evaluated our database storage objects, tables, indexes, views, as well as our code objects, triggers, functions, packages, procedures, to assess how well they could be converted to something other than a non-Oracle database. And looking at the bottom row, we can see that for this particular database, if we're looking to convert to something like Aurora Postgres, we have a really high compatibility rate. 98% of our storage objects and 91% of our code objects could be converted automatically or with minimal changes. Another tool that we have is our database migration service, also called DMS. And DMS focuses on migrating your data from one database to another. And this could be a migration from an Oracle database to another Oracle database. For example, this could be part of a cutover activity, going from an on-premises Oracle to be rehosted on Oracle EC2, or re-platformed Oracle on RDS for Oracle. Or it could be, for example, a migration from an Oracle database to a non-Oracle database like Postgres or Redshift. And one of the strengths of DMS is it allows your application to continue running during the migration. And it does this by leveraging your source database's underlying change data capture technology. At launch time in 2016, DMS supported only relational endpoints, MariaDB, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, and SQL Server. And it now supports the wide range of source and target endpoints that you see on this slide. It's evolved to meet customers' needs. For example, I see customers replicating Oracle to S3, Oracle to Kinesis or Kafka. So customers have a lot of flexibility when defining their future architecture. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to David.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. So we've talked about some of the tools like the Schema Conversion tool and the database migration service. Now let's talk about some of the people that can help you on your migration journey. First, hopefully you're familiar with AWS Solution Architects. AWS Solution Architects engage with customers to help provide knowledge and guidance for the different AWS services that we provide. For instance, Ryan and myself, we're both solution architects. In our case, we are database specialist solution architects, and we provide knowledge and best practices for the different managed database services in the AWS portfolio. Ones like the Relational Database Service, Aurora, DynamoDB, DocumentDB, Elasticache, Neptune, and others. Another important group of people who can help you are our vast ecosystem of AWS Partners and our own AWS professional services. We've highlighted a small subset of our partners on the slide behind me. These AWS database partners can bring deep expertise in database application migrations, and we even have partners who specialize in helping customers navigate the sometimes complex licensing aspects of migrating legacy commercial databases to the cloud. We also want to talk about another group of people you might not be as familiar with, our Database Migration Accelerator Advisors. We created the Database Migration Accelerator, which we refer to as DMA, to help customers migrate faster and with less risk, all by leveraging Amazon's in-house database migration experience and expertise. DMA has a number of components, the first of which is the Dma Advisors. Dma Advisors are a team of migration specialists with extensive experience in both legacy and newer database technologies. They're designed to help customers accelerate their migrations. To give an example, let's say a customer is migrating an Oracle database-backed application to Postgres. And the customer asks questions like, for my particular workload, what are the best practices? What are the rough edges to be aware of? And what's a reasonable time frame to complete the migration? Dma Advisors can help here. Dma Advisors are available to qualified customers at no additional cost. Two other components of DMA are DMA Connect and DMA Fixed Price Migrations. We'll talk about those more in just a moment. Now that we've talked a little bit about tools and we've talked a little bit about people, let's talk about some of the programs that could be of interest to you as you bring databases and applications to AWS. First is MAP, which stands for the Migration Acceleration Program. Now, MAP encompasses much more than just database. It's an umbrella program covering all aspects of migration to AWS. MAP captures our years of migrating enterprises to AWS into a repeatable methodology and approach. As part of our MAP processes, we have tools and mechanisms to help you establish a solid foundation for cloud success. With regard to databases, one of the key programs we may offer is the Optimization and Licensing Assessment for Database, OLA. An OLA for database can help collect and analyze the data needed to prepare a business case and TCO analysis that takes into account the financial constraints and opportunities around your existing commercially licensed databases. So if today you're running a number of SQL Server databases and Oracle databases, and you want to keep running them, but now run them on AWS, an OLA for database can help show you an optimal, cost-effective way to do so. Speaking of commercially licensed databases like Oracle and SQL Server, but DB2, Sybase, Teradata, Netezza, and others, many customers are interested in moving away or breaking free from their commercially licensed databases to more open cloud-native databases like Aurora, Redshift, or DynamoDB. For this, we offer a program known as Database Freedom. One of the key things the Database Freedom team can do is arrange Database Freedom workshops to help customers craft an architecture and a migration strategy for when they wish to break their application away from the legacy commercially licensed databases on the back end. In addition, the Database Freedom team, in conjunction with MAP and OLA for Database, will engage with technical and business decision makers to help build and solidify the business case, get executive buy-in, and in some cases, even provide significant credits and investments to help customers break free to more open databases. Another key resource we want to call out for you is AWS's large and growing collection of database migration best practices, playbooks, and guides. These self-service materials capture the findings from our years of helping customers migrate databases and their applications to AWS. To help give you an example of some of these materials, I'd like to bring back Ryan to walk us through some. Ryan?
All right, thanks, David. Earlier, we briefly discussed DMA, Database Migration Accelerator, and we briefly mentioned DMA Connect. Let's talk in a little deeper detail. Dma Connect is a program designed to bring you the best knowledge of our Dma Advisors to you in a self-service fashion. Initially, the team is focused on Oracle to Postgres migrations. Let's briefly look in detail at one of the guides we publish as part of this program. In this case, the guide is about migrating an application running with an Oracle backend database to work instead with Aurora Postgres backend. And these guides are engine specific because they are very detailed. But before diving into the steps of the guide, some of the first questions you should ask yourself, or one of the first is, can I migrate? So you've identified a workload that you want to migrate or modernize. What's the thought process? If there's a DMA Connect questionnaire available for your migration, then take a look at that. It's going to ask you a bunch of questions that will give you an idea about the complexity and feasibility of your migration. And then on the application side, think, do I control the code base? If you don't control the code base, then it can be hard to make changes. So if you're running a COTS product that's reliant on proprietary database technology, then let the vendor know that you're interested in running it on open source to save money. The good news is that a lot of vendors are building or transitioning their applications to leverage open source. On the database side, think, what proprietary features of this database am I using? For example, if I'm using Oracle Locator, maybe with a little bit of refactoring, I can use PostGIS and get the same sort of functionality. Between our DMA Connect prescriptive guidance and the reference material, some of which David mentioned, you should be able to find recommendations and prescriptive guidance. And everyone's workload is different, and every application has different requirements, but this guide attempts to provide a single framework breaking down your migration into 12 digestible steps. We can see the steps here and their related effort. So you can follow this framework, including the prescriptive guidance available on our website, as you embark upon your migration journey. And keep in mind that despite all these steps being sequentially numbered, this isn't a strictly linear process. Testing and bug fixing is probably going to overlap with performance tuning, and documentation and knowledge transfer may happen all along the way. And at a high level, this gives you a way to organize and plan your migration. And we start thinking about our future state architecture. And we do that by evaluating our current documentation, things like component diagrams, class diagrams, network diagrams, and data flow diagrams. And we think, which components of these do we, if any, besides the database, want to replace in our future state architecture? And we should also consider if we're going to have a transition architecture, meaning temporary infrastructure to support the migration. An example of that would be something like AWS DMS. And let's look at a couple of the steps in more detail. So once you understand your future architecture, the next step is database schema conversion. And this is a big one because you need to get your database schema converted and converted properly so you can start testing your application. And we've previously talked about SCT for assessment, but as the name implies, it's going to help with conversion. And SCT is going to identify warnings and issues and make recommendations as part of the comprehensive reports it produces. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the executive summary, which we mentioned, but diving in a little bit deeper, you can see that these issues that the tool brings up and makes recommendations. And then diving in further into the tool, your rightmost picture is actually a picture of the SCT tool. On the left-hand side, we're connected to our source database. On the right-hand side, our target. We can click on one of these issues, see the recommendations that are being given to us, and directly in the tool, we can make changes to the code. We can apply these directly to our target database or save them as SQL scripts for later. And as SCT identifies code or objects that can't be automatically migrated, you may have to do some research. And the good news is we have compiled these comprehensive set of playbooks on database migrations that can be used as reference material when you're doing your migration. For example, you want to know how data types map between two different engines, or what is the equivalent term for RMAN in Postgres. The playbook covers these type of details. The Oracle to Aurora Postgres one is 416 pages long. As I said, very comprehensive. So you don't have to read the whole document, but just know it can be used as a reference guide for you. We have these materials for SQL Server to Postgres, SQL Server to MySQL, Oracle to MySQL, and Oracle to Postgres. Now let's focus on our application. You'll see this is our second biggest piece of effort right behind testing. And few applications are islands that don't otherwise interact or integrate with other applications. For example, applications like ETL or reporting applications, or applications that are used for monitoring, looking at logs and firing off alerts. And it's important to understand these dependencies, and hopefully they would have been bubbled up during your initial discovery and assessment. Another consideration is if you're using an abstraction like an ORM tool, that a lot of these tools support multiple database engines. So the fact that you're using one of these may simplify your migration. And if you're using third-party applications that are connecting directly to a proprietary database, they're going to be affected by the migration. And if they're packaged applications, you'll have to talk to the vendor about support for RDS or Aurora Postgres. Or if they're custom, you may have to make some modifications. Into the testing phase. So this is number one effort, and I hope you spend a lot of time here. It's very important to have KPIs or metrics around your current workload, especially performance-related areas that you may be having trouble with. And by having this defined success criteria, when the migration completes, there's no question to whether it was successful or not. And having an automated test framework can really help for those unit or functional tests. It's also extremely important to test at production scale and make sure to test long enough to include any batch workflows or workloads. And when it comes time for production cutover, everyone should know what to do. Everything possible should be automated and thoroughly tested. And you should have a fallback plan in case something arises that you didn't plan for. And that should also be tested and thoroughly rehearsed. Let's talk about more ways we can help. So as we mentioned before, DMA Connect is designed to bring our expertise to you in a self-service fashion. We've talked about the questionnaire. One of the other artifacts that this team produces is on-demand webinars. And these on-demand webinars cover topics like database setup and cutover during your migration, DevOps for databases, and performance tuning. And the DMA team also conducts live weekly office hours every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific. And they also moderate a database migration area on our new repost forum. And at this point, I'd like to bring David back up. Thank you.
All right, thank you again, Ryan. Let's continue on our overview of some of the programs we have to help you mobilize and migrate and modernize. The next program we want to introduce to you is the AWS Data Lab. Simple way to understand the role of the Data Lab is to look at their slogan, which is come with an idea, leave with a solution. The Data Lab is an intensive engagement bringing together the customers, subject matter experts, and AWS subject matter experts into a single physical or virtual room, and then getting the team together to create an actionable deliverable to accelerate the customer's use case, as well as their success with our database analytics and AI ML services. So if you have an idea of what you want, but don't know yet how to get there, the AWS Data Lab might be the right vehicle for you. AWS Data Labs can be requested through your AWS account team. One final but yet important program to make you aware of is what we call the DMA fixed price migration. These are fixed price offerings that handle the conversion of both the database and the application for you. Fixed price migrations leverage AWS tools that we've talked about, like the Schema Conversion tool and database migration service, and AWS database experts with over thousands of hours of cumulative experience migrating database applications. If you recall from Ryan's slide of the 12 steps, the 3 biggest steps were converting the database schema, refactoring the application code, and testing. And that's exactly what the DMA fixed price migration does. It includes database conversion, the required application refactoring, and appropriate testing that's been agreed upon with the customer to ensure that the completed workflows are functioning as committed in a pre-prod environment. The end result is that DMA fixed price migrations can make your migrations easier and faster and with reduced risk, even when you don't have the staff available to do it yourself. In short, whatever your preference, do it yourself, do it with partners, or have AWS do it for you, we can help you migrate and modernize your database applications. So let's quickly recap what we talked about today. We started by talking about drivers for migrating applications and databases to the cloud. We discussed it could be driven by challenges with infrastructure and scalability, or driven by cost and licensing concerns, or driven by the business's desire for greater agility and innovation. Conceptually, we then looked at what the customer migration journey looks like. And we talked about how it fits into sort of 3 main phases. The assess phase, where we create a case for change. Mobilize, where we learn through experiences. And then migrate and modernize, where we move things at scale and reap great rewards. Then we talked about how AWS can help. We talked about tools like the Schema Conversion tool and the database migration service. We talked about people, such as solution architects like myself and Ryan, partners and professional services, and the Dma Advisors. And then we talked about a number of programs like Database Freedom or the OLA for Database, as well as programs like our vast library of self-service materials like guidebooks and webinars and playbooks. So in closing, we like to encourage you to dig a little bit deeper into our rich toolbox of databases that we offer here on AWS. We'd like to encourage you to join us in some of our DMA Connect webinars and take advantage of our other self-service assets. And please work with your AWS account team to strategize on how AWS can help you with your migration and modernization effort. On behalf of Ryan and myself, we'd like to thank you for your time. Also, if anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to meet you just right outside the door in the hall. So, thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon.